Hi everyone, Jay Lee here, and before we get started with our show today, I want to let you know that our store called After School Culture is officially open. Check it out at www.schoolafterhours.net. You'll find shirts for kids and adults, as well as some fun mugs. More to come in the near future. Now on with the show. Hello, everyone. Welcome to School After Hours podcast, where we talk about all things related to out of school time programming and education. I am your host, Jay Lee, and on today's show, we are going to be talking about school boards. Yes, I said it, school boards. So this came about when I started to think about my first experience in a school board meeting. Now, it felt so foreign to me because I did not understand what in the world was going on. But it made me ask some very important questions. It made me ask myself, what is the importance of the school board? How does the school board decisions affect our current generation of students, but also our future generation of students? More importantly, why is there not enough community representation on school boards depending on what district you're in? So, to kind of break this all down for us, I thought it would be great to have an expert or someone I consider an expert on this topic to go ahead and give us the ins and outs of school boards and why they are important. But also, what are some of the things that could be done better in school boards? With that being said, our guest today is school board coach Airick Crabill. AJ is the conservator at DeSoto, Texas Independent School District. During his guidance, DeSoto improved from an F rating in academics, finance, and governance to a B rating. He is also faculty at the Leadership Institute of Nevada, a collaborator with the Effective School Boards Initiative, and the National Director of Governance at the Council of the Great City Schools in Washington, D.C. AJ also received the James Bryant Conant Award, which recognizes extraordinary individual contributions to education. In other words, he's a big deal. During this episode, we'll also talk about his book that he'll be releasing today on March 28th. It's called Great on Their Behalf: Why School Boards Fail, How Yours Can Become Effective. Now that you have a little background information on our guests, let's go ahead and jump into our Community Corner. Community Corner is a segment of the show that allows guests or myself to share tips, advice, or information on a specific topic with young people, families, or community members. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into our Community Corner conversation. Hey, AJ! So, for Community Corner, my question for you is, what are some simple things community members and educators can do to get involved in their local school board?
There's a range of simple things, so I think it depends on your view of simple might vary. One option is certainly to actually run for the school board and to raise your hand and say, I want to be a part of the governing team that's going to represent the vision and values of this community. It's a big ask. It's a significant lift, but it's a powerful way to give back to your community and to be deeply involved in the success of the children in your community. So that's one way. But I grant you that might not meet everyone's definition of simple. And so when it comes to other ways that are available for folks to make a real difference in the lives of children in the community, to have an impact on the well-being not only of families but of children and your school system, is to volunteer and get personally invested in the lives of young people. And I want to distinguish between volunteering in ways that are not personally invested in the lives of a student and volunteering in ways that are personally invested in the life of a student. And so one of the things I talk about in the book is to share a story about a conversation I had with my little brother through Big Brothers Big Sisters. The intention of a program like that is to get personally invested in the life of a young person over extended periods, as tutors, as mentors, to really be a part of their story. That is a significant thing that a lot of our young people need. They just need a caring adult of goodwill who is going to be invested in them really for the longer haul. And so sometimes people think, oh, we can show up, we can do this one volunteer activity. We could volunteer in the soup kitchen, or we can show up and volunteer at an event at the school or something like that. And those are great things. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about opportunities to get personally invest in the life of a young person in the school system, whether as a mentor, as a tutor, but somebody who's looking to build a relationship over time so that you can be part of the safety net that is ensuring that that young person has access to the success that you've had, that I've had, and that we want for all of our young people.
Thank you for sharing that information with us, AJ. Now let's go ahead and jump into our interview. All right, AJ, well, it's good to have you here. Thank you for doing this interview, sir. I appreciate it. Well, for those that may not know you, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in the school board.
So there's the kind of the personal in terms of my journey, and then the personal in terms of my kids' journey. In terms of mine, I was just blessed. I had some amazing educators who made a difference for me, and if they hadn't stepped up in the way they had, I don't have the story I have today. I don't have the life I have today. So they made a difference for me, and inside of that difference, their commitment as public school educators, I have a very different story to tell, and I'm grateful for that. And part of my volunteering, which is something that is what I learned from my parents, the value of giving back to your community. And so part of this is how I now turn around and try to offer the blessing back to other students that I received. That I had blessings as part of my public education upbringing. And I want that to be everyone's story. That shouldn't be exceptional. That should be just entirely normal. From a parenting perspective, trying to figure out how to make sure that my kids are getting what they deserve at a school system, I found myself volunteering more and more at my kids' school, trying to figure out how do I help make sure that they are receiving all the supports they require. Part of that is we wound up having this Wednesday lunches with the group I referred to as my gentlemen. It's basically all the other kids who was acting, bad, just like my kid. And there's no scenario where my kid gets what they deserve if the other kids in their grade are also getting what they deserve. And so if I really want to see greatness in my own household, then that means I need to be willing to make investments in other people's households as well. And so we had this Wednesday get together. Every Wednesday at lunch, I'd show up and I'd have lunch with all of the young men that the principal designated for us to have our special gentleman's lunch. But it was really, all the other AJ type individuals who was acting up, because I definitely acted a fool in school. And so there's a sense that I had a commonality with them. And so we just built relationship that way. We just engaged and we talked through whatever issues were on their mind. And we talked through the issues that they felt challenged by, where they felt, even though they were ones, frankly, causing a lot of the problems in the school, they had a keen insight that there were things that were in the school that were not optimal for them to actually be successful and for them to really have opportunity. And so their issues became my issues. And I wound up advocating to the principal, well, why is it this way? Why don't they have access to these resources that they think are reasonable? And when they explain it, I think are reasonable too. And the principal said, I've advocated for the same things that my students have advocated for. And so that led me, and the principal said, okay, what I do next? He said, we got to go talk to the school board. And so I went with the principal, and we went to the next school board meeting. I signed up to be a public speaker. And I spoke to the board and said, here's what young people in the school need. And we've elected you all. What are y'all going to do to make it happen? And the board looked at me and said, all right, sir, your time's up. Thank you. Next speaker. I said, well, whoa, slow down now. I came to get a problem solved. Like, this is a real issue. Like, y'all can't just brush this off. Like, how are we going to talk about this? What's the answer? One of you has to have a response to me. And the 9 people on the board just kind of looked at me. Some of them, checking out their phone, reading other things or whatever. And he said, I'm sorry, sir, your time's up. We have other people who want to speak. And I felt completely dismissed. Now, what I did not realize at that time was that most school boards, and this isn't just my school board at the time, but most school boards around the country, don't actually engage in two-way dialogue during public comment time. But I didn't know that at the time, so the way I was treated just really felt disrespectful to me. And nobody bothered to tell me, if you do want to have a two-way dialogue and try to engage in problem solving, the board meeting really isn't the place for that. The board meeting is a place to conduct business. But I was just doing what I had been told to do. But the taste that left in my mouth was not a good taste. After that, I wound up talking with other brothers in the community. It's like, hey, we got to do something about these schools, and we probably need to do something about the school board. And so we started looking for people to run. And the whole story, which is way beyond what you asked, is we got together, we found three brothers who were willing to run. And I said, I'm going to rally behind y'all. This is going to be great. You all are going to be fabulous board members. You have like all the credentials and pedigree and knowledge and wisdom and understanding. Like, y'all going to be great. As a community, we're going to rally around the three of you. It's like, yeah, we're going to do this. We're going to run for the school board. We're going to get on these seats and we're going to make a difference for kids. And so we did all this planning and all this preparation. And then the time came. It was like, is there anything I need to do? Because we're about to go public with this next week now that we've done all the preparations. Like, oh yeah, and all three of them like, well, I'm gonna let my wife know this weekend, that we're running next week, but yeah, we'll be ready to go on Monday. Come Monday, we have 0 out of 3 brothers still running for the school board. And I'm like, y'all serious? It's like, oh, she said I should have talked to her earlier. It's like, brother, you can't manage your marriage. You just now talked to your wife about this? Seriously, that's how y'all do? 0 out of 3 brothers are now running for the school board. We did all this work to get it hyped up. 0 out of 3 brothers running for the school board. I couldn't even handle it. I was like, what are y'all doing? But then there's like, yeah, but AJ, you ain't got nobody. Don't nobody love you. You can run. It's perfect. And that's how I wound up running for the school board.
And I'm like, really? They just passed you the buck and was like, but you can run though.
Hey, look, he ain't got nobody. He ain't got nobody. He good. Yep. True story.
Horrible. Just horrible. It's wrong. Just think you wrong.
Right?
Just think you wrong. Shame. Just shame. But in the sense of that happening, you got a great experience out of it. And not just you took a lot away from that experience, but also you've paved the way for a lot of good people. And you're doing a great work now, helping school boards in different districts getting their governance together so that they could be effective for the communities and the students that they serve.
It's
so had it not happened,
definitely been that blessing that I wasn't looking for, no doubt.
Right. This leads me to my next question because I'm kind of curious. How did you go from being a school board member to now being a school board coach with your own business?
Well, in terms of specifically with school boards, essentially it started, as a school board member. But the school board that I joined, we were definitely not a student outcomes focused board. And it was so bad that we got about 6 months into being on the school board. And I was like, y'all, I'm out. Like, this is not what I came here to do. And so I went and I sat down with some of the women who had led my campaign. So, just some, wisdom in my community, and let them know first, out of respect, that, hey, I'm going to resign from the school board. Like, I've really worked hard. I appreciate you all helping get me here, but this is not what I came here for. I'm not having any impact. And so I explained this to these folks, and they explained to me that they did not knock on all these doors in order for me to punk out in the middle of the job. And so that I needed to find something else to do with my game plan, but this wasn't the one. I was like, well, that didn't work the way I planned. And so they turned me all around. It's like, nah, brother, that's not the one. You need to go.
Right, that's not what we're doing.
We didn't knock on all these doors for you to be a punk. It's basically the message I got. I was like, man, that was not what I was trying to hear today. But this is, I think, a good leadership message for anybody out there. Surround yourself with people who are going to tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. And I made the mistake of surrounding myself with people who told me what I needed to hear, not what I wanted to hear. That would have been nice that day to hear what I wanted to hear, but I made a mistake. I surrounded myself with people who told me what I needed to hear. And so as a result of that, I said, okay, well, I'm not trying to have these people, beat me up in my own neighborhood, so I got to find a new plan. And so I said, if I'm not allowed to quit, then what would it take for this board to actually be focused on student outcomes? And you know what? That's what I should have interrogated from the very beginning. Why that isn't it? I don't know. Like, that's just a deficit in me that's not where I went for. That where I went first was, I'm going to quit. Like, that is just a character flaw in me that manifested in that moment. And that the only thing that saved me from that weakness was the wisdom of some of my elders who turned me around. It's like, that ain't the one. And so what I began to seek out was to do research and homework on what would it look like for school board to actually be intentionally focused on improving student outcomes. And by the grace of God, I found a great coach and found some great books and found some other things that helped me start to craft a vision. We found a bunch of other people. We got together who shared that vision. We had folks run for the school board who had that shared vision. They all won. And then next thing you know, I'm the board chair, and we spent the next several years implementing a transition from an adult inputs focused approach to governing to a student outcomes focused approach to governing. And it's that work then that had other people call and said, hey, your board was cray. If y'all can get it together, can you come help my board get it together? And that's what started me on this journey of trying to be of service to other communities, children, and leaders as well as a school board coach across the country.
My other question for you, leading into, leaving what we were just discussing, based on your experience in our education system, what role does the school board play? And why is it important?
Yeah, there are two really critical things you have to understand to get clarity around the role that the school board plays. The first is, why does the school system even exist to begin with? Because a lot of people get this twisted, and if you don't have clarity on this, the rest of it doesn't make sense. The school system exists for one reason and one reason only, and that's to improve student outcomes. That is the only reason the school system exists, to cause improvements in what students know and are able to do. And so you hear me say the role of the school system is to improve student outcomes. What that means is what they know and what they're able to do must be constantly growing as a result of them being in the school system. The reason this is a critical insight is because when they leave the system, that's all they're going to take with them. When you walk across that stage, you don't get to take the laptop with you. You leave that behind. When you walk across the stage, you don't get to take all the textbooks with you. You leave that behind. When you walk across the stage, you don't get to snatch up your favorite teacher and take them with you. You leave them behind. The only thing that you take with you when you walk across that stage is your knowledge and skills, what you know and what you were able to do. And so the reason school systems exist is to cause improvements in what students know and are able to do, to cause improvements in student outcomes, because that's what they need to live a choice-filled life where they have a sense of agency and can engage with life on their own terms and pursue happiness and support themselves and their family on their own terms. And so this is the only reason school systems exist. This is an important insight because often folks think that school systems exist to adopt a budget or to hire and fire the superintendent, or to make sure the colors on the stadium are the right colors, or that the architecture plans, have the door in the right location and all these other things. And these are important things. I'm not suggesting they aren't. They're just not why the school system exists. If you get all of the things right, all the buses and all the books, you get all the burritos and hamburgers and all that right, but little AJ isn't literate and numerate on grade level, you have failed. You've absolutely failed. And so the first thing to be clear about is why school systems exist. They exist to improve student outcomes, to cause improvements in what young people know and are able to do, such that when they walk across that stage, that they have the knowledge and skills necessary to really live a choice-filled life on their own terms. That's the first thing you got to be clear about. Then once you're clear about that school systems only exist to improve student outcomes, then you can ask the question, okay, then why do we have a school board? And essentially it's because a community gets to be a certain size. It doesn't make sense to have everybody in the community sitting around trying to make decisions about the school district. And so somebody at some point got the brilliant idea, we can't all sit here and make decisions about the school district. Why don't, instead of all of us trying to express our own values about what should happen and our own vision for what should happen, instead of all of us doing that, why don't we select a group of folks to represent us? And their job will be to represent our vision and our values on our behalf so that we can get things done more efficiently. And that group of folks who are selected to represent the vision and values of the community, we refer to as the school board. So the role of the school board is to represent the vision and values of the community, to represent the community's vision for what are the student outcomes we want to see our students know and be able to do, and represent the community's values. What are the non-negotiables that have to be honored on the journey to accomplishing the vision? And so that's the role of the school board, to represent the vision and values of the community.
Do you feel or do you believe that sometimes in making those decisions, politics can get in the way of making those decisions or a personal agenda?
Unfortunately, it's possible. The thing I've observed working with school board members across the nation is that these are folks who generally are not compensated or maybe receive some mild stipend, but this is largely volunteer work. This is largely mission work where people are raising their hand and saying, I want to be part of what helping students in our community be great. That being said, while the spirit is willing, the flesh is weak, and it is incredibly easy for folks to be seduced away from the purpose that drew them into service in the first place. It's easy to hear a bunch of folks arguing for something that fits their interest and to allow that to become your understanding of what fits students' interest. The part of the antidote to this is that we need school boards to get intensely focused on improving student outcomes. We need boards that are getting very crystal clear about what's the community's vision and writing it down in the form of goals about student outcomes, and then spending the majority of their time, at least 50% of their time every month, monitoring progress toward those outcomes, really digging in to figure out what is it that our students know and are able to do compared to where we want them to be. Are they on track to get there? If not, what are we going to do about it? If they are, how are we going to get more of that? But that kind of grounding, that conversation makes it easier for board members to stay on focus, stay on purpose. But in the absence of the board being intentionally focused on student outcomes, I think it's very easy to hear all of the voices in the community that have their own legitimate concerns. It's not that their concerns aren't legitimate. It's just often their concerns are about student outcomes. And in the absence of the board having a rigorous agenda about being focused on student outcomes, it's easy for the board to fall back into a focus on all of the adult inputs that folks have interest in. Well, did Ray and them get a job? Did my, Pookie and them get a contract? How are we making sure that the football stadium is the right color? Do we get the right person's name on this conference room? Do we have the right buses? Do we have the right books? Do we have the right, burritos and hamburgers in the lunchroom? And all of these other issues that have relevance, but that they don't tell us what students know and are able to do. But in the absence of the board having a clear vision and staying aligned to that vision through its work each month, I think, it's absolutely easy for folks to get pulled into a focus on adult inputs rather than staying focused on student outcomes.
Got it. And based on that answer, where do you see school boards failing and where do you see them succeeding?
Yeah. And so the key failure points that I lift up in the book are around knowledge, skills, and mindset. Knowledge is, what do you know? Do you know as a board that you should probably have some goals? If you don't know that, we need to upgrade you. But that's the first point of failure, is that a lot of boards just haven't adopted goals. Do you know that those goals should actually be about what students know and are able to do? And a lot of board members don't know that. And so we look across the country, you see a lot of boards that they've adopted goals around, the facility should be great, goals around the budget and all these other things. And again, these are important issues and they do have to be attended to, but they're not the main thing. They don't tell, if we spend all the money right, that doesn't tell us if little AJ can read. If we have all the facilities right, that doesn't tell us that little AJ can do math and solve problems and collaborate and think critically. Like, all of the adult inputs are important. They're just not the reason school system exists. And so the board can't make them the main thing. So board members often don't know that the goals need to all be about student outcomes. They need to all be about what do we want students to know and be able to do. But that's a knowledge fail. A lot of board members don't know that. And so in the absence of knowing it, they don't do it. But my experience is when board members know better, they do better. The second point of fail is around skills. Where knowledge is what you know, skills is how do you use what you know. It's one thing to know that you should have goals about student outcomes. It's a whole other deal to actually be able to create goals about student outcomes. And so a lot of the work that my team and I do is actually working with board members to actually implement a vision for student outcomes focus. How do we change our agendas to actually be focused on it? These are skill issues. How do we actually implement effective monitoring during the board meeting? How do we effectively evaluate the superintendent based on accomplishment of the goals? These are matters of skill. A lot of boards just don't have these skills because they're not being taught. And so this is the second major area of failure. But both of those are eclipsed by the third area of failure, the area that we think is the largest opportunity for improvements in student outcomes. It's the area we refer to as mindset, where knowledge is about what you know, skills are about what you can do. Mindset is about, how do you see the world? How do things occur for you? How do you make meaning of the things that are happening around you? And as an example, I tell a story in the book about in my senior year in high school, where I had teachers who had the mindset that AJ is trouble. And to be fair, they were not wrong. But inside of the mindset, AJ is trouble, folks would basically do whatever they could to get me out of their class or somehow excommunicate me from the instructional environment. At the exact same time, I had a group of teachers, two in particular, DeBarth and Murphy, whose their mindset, looking at the exact same evidence, my trifling behavior, looking at the exact same evidence, said, you know what? AJ has within him the possibility for greatness, and we are going to put in the work to cultivate it. It's a different mindset. The reality of me hadn't changed. The facts of the situation hadn't changed. The only thing that changed between Group A and Group B is the way they choose to see the world as occurring around them. Inside of this first mindset, little AJ, is trouble. He ain't trying to learn. Anything that happens next just serves as an excuse that we can make for why we don't get little AJ what he deserves. But inside of this empowering mindset, little AJ wants to learn. He has the skills. I've got to figure out how to be a catapult to get him to where he's trying to go. Then there are no issues that those teachers weren't able to overcome in their ability to reach me and help me excel in the areas of their subjects. And so this idea of mindset, a way of seeing the world, if the board comes into it and says, we got all these kids who they just ain't trying to learn, then the board will behave in one way. And that is the path that will lead to the harm of children. If the board comes at it with, these children want to learn, and as a board member, we're responsible for creating the conditions for improving student outcomes. And that if little AJ isn't learning, as a board member, I got to figure out what do I have to do differently in my own behavior to create the conditions for little AJ's success. It's a whole different mindset. And inside of a different mindset, it gives rise to a whole different set of behaviors. Mm-hmm. So this is the sacred work that we try to engage in with the boards that we're serving, is what are the knowledge, skills, and mindset that boards need to really live out their aspirations, live out their intentions of being great on behalf of the students they serve.
Mm. And with that being said, it makes me think about being part of the community, have similar values of the community that you're representing. So as board members, is it suggestible that you go to visit some of the schools to see how some of the kids are doing? Like you build those school relationships and let people know that, what are some of the things, or tell me what are some of the things that you need and how can we as a board best serve you?
Yeah, it's not really possible to represent the vision and values of the community if you ain't talking to nobody. So it's very clear that being in communication with the community, your students, as well as your staff, as well as parents, as well as community members, that is a critical part of what it is to be able to represent the vision and values of the community. If you're not listening for the vision and listening for the values and figuring out what is really going on there and how do we get underneath of that, if you're not doing that work, then you can't do the job. This is a critical piece of the board's work. Once you've listened for the vision and values as a board, once the board has made intentional time to go out into the community, not just sitting around waiting for community to come to you, but once the board has been intentional about kind of stepping down off the dais, putting the gavel aside and going out into the community to actually authentically listen to folks, then the board has to come back together and say, okay, what did we hear? And we need to write it down and make it plain. When the board writes down the community's vision, I refer to that as setting goals. The community's vision is always about what is it we want our students to know and be able to do. So the board needs to listen for the vision of the community, come back, sit down, and synthesize that into a set of SMART goals about what students should know and be able to do. And the board should listen for the values of the community and then come back together and say, okay, what did we hear? And then begin to write that down. And when we write down the values of the community, I refer to that as guardrails. They're saying, what are the non-negotiables that this community values that have to be honored while we're on our path to accomplishing the vision? You have to have both. You have to have the vision, where are we going? And you have to have the values. What are the non-negotiables that have to be honored on the way there? The way I frequently explain this to folks is I was leaving my office once and headed to the airport. And so I called a rideshare. And the first thing you put into the app when you call a rideshare is what?
I have no idea. I haven't used it.
Where do you want to go? It's like calling a taxi. You tell it where do you want to go to? And so in this case, I type in the app, I want to go to the airport. And so It shows up, I hop in the back, and on this particular day, I happen to know that the most obvious path to the airport was completely shut down for construction. So I lean forward to the driver and say, hey, don't take I-35 because it's shut down for construction. Now I have told the driver two things. I've given him my vision, the goal, which is
I'm trying to get to the airport.
Trying at the airport, and I've given my value, the guardrail, which is don't take I-35. What's the value I'm trying to protect by saying don't take I-35?
Trying to get to my vision. Like, we trying to get to the airport.
Yeah, preferably before the plane leaves. Like, yeah, we want to be on the plane when it flies away.
Don't leave me.
And so now I've given my driver my vision and my values. I've given the driver the goal and the guardrail. Now, there are probably 4-5 other ways that you could get to the airport from my office. Who picks which way we take to get there?
Oh, now it depends. Because that's just being that he is the driver, he can pick. And being
the driver picks, that's right. And sometimes we're going to have to take a left. Sometimes we're going to have to take a right. And who picks that?
The driver does. Or you could be the ones in the back, being that you have the GPS, give the instruction.
Nah. We ain't trying to have these drivers. We ain't trying to have these backseat drivers. No. You need...
But let's talk about it. But you do sometimes. You do have these backseat drivers sometimes.
But here's the reality. If the driver don't know how to get to the airport, you have chosen the wrong driver. The solution isn't be a backseat driver. The solution is find somebody who knows their job.
You're right.
And so that's a situation. Every now and then we had to speed up or slow down. And who makes that decision?
Right, the driver.
So are you trying to tell me I'm in the back seat? I shouldn't reach up and grab the steering wheel, be like, hey, we need to make this right quick. That's not what I should do.
Well, that's a whole crash. No, we definitely ain't going nowhere.
That is definitely not honoring my values or my vision. And so this is the work of the board. Is in that moment I'm governing the car. I'm not managing the car. The driver is managing the car, but I'm governing the car. I've said, here's the vision, here's the values, here's the goal and the guardrails. And your job is to implement the vision while honoring the guardrails. And then the driver, they do all that. They're managing the vehicle. I'm governing the vehicle. And this is the work of the school board. As they say to the superintendent, we've listened for the vision values of the community. We've codified them into a set of goals and guardrails. Now, superintendent, your job is to get us to the airport without taking this particular path. Any other path that you wind up taking, that's on you, because we hired you to be the professional driver. You understand education. Otherwise we wouldn't have hired you. And if it turns out that you don't know how to drive, we're not going to sit here and explain it to you. We just go get a different driver. But that is the distinction between what is the work of the board is to represent the vision and values of the community by codifying it to a set of goals and guardrails and then passing it to the superintendent and then monitoring constantly to make sure that we're on the right track. And versus the job of the superintendent, which is to implement the vision and values of the community as handed to them by the board in the form of the goals and guardrails. And then they make operational decisions to figure out how we're going to get there. This is the work of school boards. And when school boards don't do their job of going out and listening to the community, when boards don't do their job of writing it down and making it plain, or when school boards don't do their job of then passing it to the superintendent and then monitoring performance over time, children don't get what they deserve. And that's not a staff failure, that's a board failure.
Dropping gems. Well, before we get to this success part, let's go ahead and take a small break. So everybody can go ahead, get your chips, do your bathroom break, do all the things that you got to do. Make sure that you come back to this conversation because we get into the real good stuff. I don't want you to miss nothing. So I'll see y'all in a couple of minutes. We're going to pay these bills and we'll be right back. Hey, everybody. Well, welcome back. I'm so happy that you decided to join us for the second half of this interview. We have Mr. AJ Crabill with us, and he's talking to us about his book, but also the importance of school board and the role that everyone plays. And where we left off was talking about some of the failures that he's seen in school boards, but also what's everyone's role? Why is it important? And what they can be doing to model those student outcomes that we want to have for our children. So with that being said, let's go ahead and look at some of these successes that Mr. Crabill has seen. So Mr. Crabill, AJ.
Yes.
AJ, so we left off on some of the things that could be improved with school boards. But being that you've worked with so many school boards, what are some of the successes that you see?
Yeah, and I'll start at home first. I'm really proud of the district where I work right now, DeSoto ISD in DeSoto, Texas, just on the south side of Dallas. And when I joined the district 2.5 years ago, our board was really in a place of struggle. And in Texas, we have a rubric from the state that the board can use to self-evaluate itself on a scale of 0 to 100. And so the board then can give itself a B, C, D, F rating based on the board's current behavior. And so when I arrived, the board gave itself a score of 12 out of 100. And so it was obviously very, very low performance. But it describes, some of the struggles that the board was having. It's not that we had people who didn't want greatness for children. It's just they were struggling to figure out how to get there. And part of my role was to be a coach and support the board in figuring out how to move from the F rating that we're at to preferably a B rating or above. Fast forward 2.5 years, and they recently conducted that exact same evaluation again and earned a B rating. I think it was at 84. And so what it suggests is that in the span of 2 years, it's possible to go from incredibly low performance to incredibly high performance in governing. And so your question is, how did they get there? What are some of the major changes they made? Probably one of the more dramatic changes they made is how they use their time. So the board previously spent effectively no time really digging into our children learning in our school system. Is all the adult inputs. Is, do we like this contract? Do we not like this contract? Do we like this person? Do we not like this person? And all of these issues that kind of get caught up in drama and riled up. And it's not that those issues don't have relevance. It's that spending all your time on those doesn't actually tell you if children have learned anything. That's the problem, is if we focus all of our energy on the adult inputs to the exclusion of any focus on student outcomes, we set children up to fail because we aren't looking for them. We aren't looking for seeing what's going on with little AJ. Is he actually getting what he needs or not? We're busy talking about the adult drama. And so that's where we were as a school board, but that's not where we are today. Today, the board routinely invests month in and month out, at least 50% of its time focused on student outcomes, 50% of its time, if its minutes each month focused on are children learning? Where are they learning? Where are they not learning? What has been our response? What about our response worked? What about our response didn't work? And what are we going to do next? And this conversation is just deeply focused in on what does it take for children to have access to the quality of education they deserve? And how do we know if they're accessing that or not? And what are we doing in response to what we know? Like, that's the majority of the conversation. And it's so exciting to watch the board meetings. You're part of the monitoring the student performance is regularly the board will have students come in who have exemplified growth in whatever area we're watching. So if we're talking about third grade literacy on a particular night, then it's not unusual to maybe have some second and third graders come in who have shown remarkable growth in the literacy scores, and to just shower love on them, lift them up, exalt them for the hard work that they've put in to really grow over time. While we're here, can we see the parents? Can you stand up? If this is one of your children, can you stand up? Thank you for the work that you were doing as a parent to really lift your child up. Or is there a teacher in the house? Or the teachers for these students? Could you please stand up? We want to honor you for all the work that you put in for these children. And so we take it as an opportunity as a village to come together and say, this is what greatness in our community looks like. The children are growing, that we bring them in here, we honor them, and we honor the adults who've played such a direct role in the greatness that children are experiencing. That is a normal part of our monitoring process. That is night and day from the way the board invested its time 2.5 years ago, and it couldn't be more proud.
Nice. And you don't often hear that, especially going to some of the school board meetings that I have gone to. Like you said, you hear a lot of, what's this, what's that. You don't really hear much about the children and what they need. But to hear that the children was recognized and celebrated for their achievements, but not just the children, also the administrative staff and the teachers that are with them grinding it out day to day is also something to be celebrated on all parts.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other question that I have for you leading into school boards, representation is important, right?
Okay.
So the question that I have is, how do we get to a place where the school board, when making those values, that have some representation from the community, whether that be someone of the same or similar ethnic backgrounds as well as socioeconomic backgrounds. So you have a mixture going on, and that board is diversified enough so we see where we are, but we know where we want to go.
Yeah, the first part of understanding your question is that it's important for your listeners to be clear about what you just said is accurate, that representation matters, but it's probably not for the reason that everybody suggests. So first I want to dig into that, and then how do we get there? So part of the reason representation matters is because we have fairly compelling evidence in the research literature that in governance bodies where they are engaged in discernment and decision making, where they're really trying to look at long-term phenomenon. So the superintendent, their job is to deal with the day-to-day. But the board is really looking over the horizon and trying to figure out what's coming next, and how do we make sure that the vision of the community is accomplished over the long term, and how do we make sure that the values are honored over the long term. That's governance work, not management work. And we have fairly compelling evidence suggested in governance work that you are best served, that you're most likely going to make the most optimal decisions is when you have a body that is broadly representative of the constituents being served, that they have the insights necessary to understand what's going to happen next and what it's going to take to get there. That type of insight generally comes from having a deliberative body that is as diverse as the community that it serves. To speak directly to your point, if this is a community of all Black folks, and we all are of kind of the same socioeconomic strata, then you could have a board that's all Black folks from this community of the same socioeconomic strata, and that would probably work. But if this district is half Black folks or half brown folks, well, then we need a board that has both of those viewpoints. And if it's got some other folks in it, then we need some folks from there, other folks. Similarly, however, if this is an all African-American community with folks in the same economic strata, all from this community, born and raised, if you have a Black person from United Kingdoms, never lived in the U.S., grew up in an affluent family, just because they happen to be Black doesn't mean that they would actually be representative of the vision and values of this community, because it's just not a perspective that they hold. And so it's not just about making sure that we got the right colors. Not all skin folk or kinfolk. Like it's about making sure that we have representationality of the perspectives and the lived experience. And so it's a little bit more complicated than just let's get some Black folks on here, because that might not always make sense. If it's some white guy who grew up on this block and this is the only place he ever lived, he might be the one. And so what you're looking for is who have the perspectives that represent the vision and values of this community. And so sometimes you have to make sure that as you look at the board that we have a representational mix. Now, the question that you ask essentially kind of suggests that there are going to be times when it feels like that's not the case, where we don't have representation. Mm-hmm. And the reason that's problematic is because the board that isn't broadly representative, that doesn't have that diversity of perspective, is probably just not as well positioned to make long-term strategic decisions as the board that is broadly representative. So all that to say, representation does matter, but not always in the way people think. Like, you've got to get past that and realize, okay, what we're looking for is representation of perspective. Do we have an understanding of where people are coming from, what their lived experience is, and do we have in some way, have we made sure that that's represented on the board? Now to your question, which is what happens when that's not the case? And that then it becomes the obligation in a democracy of the community to come together and say, we need to find folks who are actually going to run. This takes you back to my story of coming together and trying to find some folks who are going to run. So the moral of that story is make sure you talk to people's spouses before you just decide that y'all going to do something. Make sure you have the whole team on board. Don't do what I did. You got to have the whole team. And so that's lesson number one. But then once you've got the whole team on board, actually have intentional conversations with the community about who will represent our vision and values well, and how will we as a community come around them to lift them up so that they will serve on our behalf. Because it is a sacrifice. Like, you are asking people to take time away from their family to sit in meetings on our behalf, often for no compensation whatsoever, or for very, very little compensation. Not enough that it makes it worthwhile that you can take care of your family on top of it. It just covers some basic expenses. So we're asking people to sacrifice time with their families, time at work, in order to be of service for the rest of us. I would take that seriously and have meaningful dialogue around, hey, we need our vision and our values represented on the school board. There's nobody on the school board right now for whom that's true. Who do we think would be great? Let's make sure that we visit with them and their spouse together, if they got one, and then let them know, hey, we are going to have your back. You're not going to be alone in this. You will be sitting at the board table without us, but we will have you back every step of the way. And so I think some folks are just going to need that encouragement. Now, that being said, quick caveat. If somebody is super eager to be on the school board, that might be a red flag. And somebody's like, ooh, pick me. I want to be on the school board. Maybe back off of that person. Often the best people are the people who like, nah, I ain't trying to have nothing to do with that. I'm out here trying to live my best life. Y'all ain't going to have me hemmed up at a board meeting. Like, I love the children. Like, oftentimes the people who want it the least are often the people who you should pick the most. And so just a little pro tip on that one. Make sure you meet the fam and make sure you gauge that people aren't too eager, because inside of that over eagerness, they might step over some things that don't work for the rest of us. And so those are just some pro tips from the field.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing. We greatly appreciate it. But what you said was very, very true. Like, try to find someone that's within your common interest, but also don't always look for the easy win or the most obvious.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Dig a little deeper, do a little research, encourage those people, nudge those people and tell them like, hey, so, I feel like you'd be great at this.
Well, and look for the people who are already doing the work. Like, there are already people out here who are already getting deeply invested in the lives of children in the community. They're already volunteering. They're already putting their time, their talent, their energy on the line on behalf of children. Often those are the folks that you want to select, not the folks who show up brand new and ain't never done anything to serve the community before. Find the folks who are already investing themselves in children in the community and say, we get that you were volunteering in this way. We now need you to step up and volunteer in this way.
True. Very, very true. So, AJ, you got this book coming out this month, right?
Mm-hmm.
The title of the book is Great on Their Behalf, Why School Boards Fail, How Yours Can Be Effective. Now, of all the things that you have done, why did you want to write the book, and why was it most important to you to write the book?
Well, want to write the book may be overstating it. I don't know that was the case. But there are two things that were really significant drivers. One, I work with a lot of folks and people on my team and people on school boards I've worked with, and they said, AJ, we don't want to talk to you all the time. Can you just write it down so we can have some place to go so we can get it without having to fool with you? And I was like, you know what? That's legit. I don't want to fool with me either someday. So yeah, I feel you on that one. So that was one thing. There were honest requests from folks that I've worked with that said, we really wish that you'd write this down so we'd have easier access to that. And I'm like, that's reasonable. But then the second reason that really drove this is that the more that we've worked with school systems across the country, the more it's been obvious that there is just a culture of adult input focus. Like, that is the dominant, the default, the de facto, the status quo approach to governing across the country. It is a focus on adult inputs. And the intention in this book is to accelerate the transition away from an adult inputs focused school system and school board toward a student outcomes focused school board. And the more we can get that message out, the more that we can get people talking about what is this distinction between being an adult inputs focused and student outcomes focused, the more I believe that we can really do good for children in need. And I want to be clear about this. Like, in places where the board is not doing what it needs to do, often school systems are having some success, but it's in spite of the board, not because of the board. And the problem is that the board can be a little bit of a value add. That little extra value, that's what little AJ needs. So the children who already have access to resources and access to prosperity and access to privilege, if we are missing out on that little extra bump that the school will provide, they're probably going to be okay. They have enough other safety nets that will probably buoy them in the event of calamity. But for the little AJs out here who need every safety net to be in their path to prevent them from hitting rock bottom, like, that student needs the school system to be at its most optimal, which includes the board being at its most optimal. So when school boards fail, we need to be clear that that failure disproportionately impacts our most academically vulnerable children more so than it impacts our other children who are more academically privileged. We have to be clear that the consequences of not governing in a student outcomes focused way have very real ramifications for our children who are already most vulnerable. And so that was the second aspiration, is how do we accelerate this transition away from an adult inputs focused school board culture toward a student outcomes focused one.
So you've written the book, you're in the process of promoting, but also what do you feel is next for you on your journey?
A lot of this is around how do we accelerate the transition? How do we move away from this adult inputs focus and towards a student outcomes focus? And so I think there are a few other things. Certainly I need to connect with folks around the country who have a heart for this work as well, and help position them to be involved in this work. And so one of the things I want to do is I want to get one or two more cohorts running each year where we're intentionally helping train people to be student outcomes focused coaches who are working with school boards and helping them in a very hands-on manner. That's a lot of the work I do and my team does, but there's only a few of us. We really need an army. We literally need hundreds of coaches who are certified in a student outcomes focused approach to governance out in across the nation working with school boards. So figuring out how can I be a conduit for identifying, for finding folks who it's on their heart to be coaches for school boards and help them go through the training they need to be a effective coach who can help boards become more focused on student outcomes. So I suspect over the next year, I find myself looking for more and more ways. How can we grow, support, develop more coaches who can help support more boards?
Good stuff. I'm excited. I'm like, yeah, we're gonna have a whole bunch of y'all out here in a minute.
Hey, look, and if you got folks who are listening and you feel the calling on your spirit, the calling on your heart to potentially consider being involved this way, hey, reach out. Let's do work.
Well, everyone, that wraps up the interview portion of our show. We're going to go ahead and transition over into our Professionals Lounge. Professionals Lounge is a segment of the show that allows guests to share advice with other practitioners in the OST and youth development field about how they can begin growing their gifts and talents, but also develop themselves as professionals in the field. Here's our Professionals Lounge conversation. So, for Professionals Lounge, AJ, this is my question for you. If a person wanted to campaign for a school board position, what are some of the necessary steps that individual needs to take to prepare for that process?
Yeah, so I appreciate this question. I have a very specific view of what effective campaigning looks like. And I've had the privilege of being involved in a number of campaigns and essentially winning all of them except for one. And that one is because the candidate just didn't do what they needed to do. And so that's kind of the message, is that you need to have folks who are willing to put in the work. And for me, that means going door to door and knocking on doors, taking it to the street, taking it to the people, going out into the community and spending the time visiting with folks on their doorstep, bringing your literature with you, also having a team of folks who are also knocking on doors with you so y'all can, work through entire neighborhoods. But this reality that, in my view, if you really want to be effective as a school board member at representing the vision and values of the community, that starts on the campaign trail. And if you ain't willing to go out and hit these doors, then maybe just don't run. Like if you go be lazy, definitely our kids don't need you. You ain't the one. And so to me, that's a real firm threshold. If people are not willing to go out and communicate with the people in the community on their doorsteps. And so if you come back and say, oh, well, I'm afraid to go out to all these neighborhoods. Well, that's fine, but maybe you shouldn't be representing them then. Like if you have a spirit of fearfulness around some of the neighborhoods, that's fine. You should trust that feeling. But that means these probably aren't the neighborhoods that you should be representing. Somebody who does not have a spirit of fearfulness being in these neighborhoods is probably who should be representing them. And so this is the challenge I have, is like, you want to represent us, then you need to be willing to come up and stand among us. And if that's not for you, that's fine, but maybe just don't run. And so that's the thing that I would invite people to just be reflective of, is, do I feel like I can go authentically out and visit with all of the people in this community, in this area, and really hear what's on their heart, on their doorstep, on their terms, If you feel like that's for you, then I would say, yeah, you're probably on the path. If any of that leaves you with trepidations, then maybe pick something else. Like there's still opportunities for you to be deeply invested in the lives of young people, but maybe not through this role that is entirely about representing the vision and values of the community.
Right. Well, here. I support it. Because that's the truth. Like, if you can't go out and have a conversation with them, maybe this ain't your bag of tea. Maybe this is not your bag of tea.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much, AJ, for doing this interview with me. I greatly appreciate it. For all of you that are listening, go ahead and get that book. When is the drop date?
March 28th.
March 28th. So make sure that you order it. Is it Amazon available?
Wherever you find your books, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all that.
Wonderful. Go ahead and buy this book. Oh, AJ, do you have any social handles that you want to share for anyone that wants to get in touch with you and learn a little bit more?
Yeah, track me down. I'm in most places at AJ Crabill or AJ Crabill 7. But also, if folks want to check my website where you can contact me, it's ajcrabill.com, just ajcrabill.com, or email me at aj@ajcrabill.com.
Well, everyone, that brings us to the end of our show. I'd like to thank our guest, AJ, for being here with us today and having this conversation about school boards, but also letting us know about his new book that he's releasing today. Feel free to come back to have a chat with us anytime and keep us updated on the things that you're doing in the near future. If you enjoyed this episode and feel you received some good information, give us a review on Apple Podcasts or visit the Podchaser website and leave us a comment. This will help us get feedback on the show and collect testimonials for our personal website. Share us with your friends, share us with your family, share us with your network. Help us spread the word about how out-of-school time programming is impacting our youth as well as our communities. We can be found on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Podcast Addict. Well, that's all I have for today. In the words of Mr. Arthur Ashe, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. Until next time, bye-bye.